It's not often that Ligue 1 makes international news. The top flight of French football, despite being renowned as one of the finest talent factories in the world, attracts just a fraction of the global television audience of the Premier League or La Liga. But last weekend, news of Neymar and Lionel Messi, two of the best known and most celebrated players in all of world football, getting booed by their own supporters in a game against Bordeaux, did just that. The boos that rang around the Parc des Princes came in light of PSG's midweek capitulation against Real Madrid in the Champions League, which is just the latest in a long line of Champions League capitulations from a team of very expensively assembled but totally dysfunctional superstars. The problems at PSG and how they have become a crisis club despite being owned by one of the richest countries in the world and having a budget 5 times that of any other team in their division is a topic that I've already explored at length though in this video from November entitled "Have PSG created a monster they can't control?" The answer, as it turned out, was yes. So whilst Messi and Neymar felt the burn of 40,000 furious Parisians in the most recent instalment of the Paris Saint-Germain soap opera, my focus was actually on their opponents Bordeaux, who despite being cheered on by PSG fans throughout much of the game, seemingly having turned on their entire team by that stage, slumped to yet another heavy defeat. There is no shame in Ligue 1 in being well beaten by PSG. Maurizio Pochettino's side currently enjoy a 15-point cushion at the top of the table, as they look to retake their Ligue 1 crown. But defeat, despair, and dejection have become all too familiar to Bordeaux this season against far less decorated, talented, and expensive teams than PSG. Going into the last 10 games of the season, Bordeaux, who won the Ligue 1 title as recently as 2009 and beat Bayern Munich twice in the Champions League the following season, are currently bottom of the Ligue 1 table, 5 points from safety, with the worst goal difference in the division and having won just 4 games all season. You don't need to be an expert to spot that something isn't going very well, but a number of you in recent weeks have commented and messaged me asking precisely what that something is, presumably because you would think that it would take something pretty major to cause that kind of collapse over such a short period of time at one of the biggest and most successful clubs in the French game. Well, you would be quite right. It did take something pretty major. Actually, a few things that were pretty major, and in today's video, I'll do my best to cover all of them. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to the wine capital of the world for a vintage HITC Sevens documentary, to a beautiful port city of castles, cathedrals, and vineyards as we get tangled up in the vines of a football club, Girondins de Bordeaux, that was once as elegant and grandiose as the city that it calls home, but now looks as ragged as Louis XVI after the Girondins had caught and arrested him, and risks meeting the very same fate, not on the guillotine in their case, but at the hands of football's gods. Bordeaux are a footballing institution in France. Founded in 1881, only Marseille have spent more seasons in the top flight of French football since the creation of Ligue 1 at the start of the 1930s. During that time, Bordeaux have won 17 trophies, including 6 league titles, and they have either produced or helped to develop some of France's finest players, such as Alain Giresse, Jean Tigana, and Zinedine Zidane. Bordeaux's best years came during the 1980s, when the club won 3 league titles in 4 years, whilst beating the likes of Athletic Bilbao and Juventus in the European Cup, during an era that was followed by a steep decline, administration, and relegation. Bordeaux bounced back though, and in the 2008-09 season, they ended Lyon's run of 7 successive Ligue 1 titles 2 years before the Qataris took over at PSG and shifted the power base of French football over to the capital. The following season, Bordeaux not only did the double over Bayern Munich and beat Juventus in the Champions League, finishing top of their group without a single defeat to their name and banishing Juventus to the Europa League, they went all the way to the quarterfinals, where Laurent Blanc's side were narrowly beaten by Lyon. The star of that side was Johan Gourcuff, Bordeaux's tall, elegant, and talismanic number 10, whose performances and style of play earned him comparisons with another former Bordeaux man, namely Zinedine Zidane. Gerkuf departed in the summer of 2010 in a €22 million move to title rivals Lyon, and over the same summer, Laurent Blanc quit his job as Bordeaux boss to take charge of France's national team. That signalled the end of Bordeaux as genuine title challengers, but all was not lost. The club remained competitive, furthering their reputation as a team that signed and developed talented young players, and they finished 6th in Ligue 1 as recently as 2018, in addition to reaching the group stage of the 2018-19 Europa League. It is really in 2018 that our story begins, in terms of the downfall of Bordeaux, and as is so often the case, it began with a change of ownership. In November 2018, following 9 months of negotiations, General American Capital Partners, or GACP, a hedge fund based in Miami, acquired Bordeaux for $82 million. GACP had no previous experience in football, and little was known about the company or their management team in Bordeaux at that time. GACP entered into the deal in partnership with King Street Capital Management, another American private equity firm who were little known in France and who weren't actually mentioned in any of the press releases that were put out at the time. Bordeaux fans weren't best pleased when news of the takeover broke. Whilst their club had been stagnating a little under the ownership of the Group M6 Media Group, who had owned Bordeaux since 1999, things were at least generally stable. And those of you who watched the documentary that I made about the issues at Marseille last season will both know and understand why French football fans are rather dubious about American owners, and particularly hedge funds and private equity firms. Firstly, there is an assumption that they don't know much about football, and secondly, there is an understanding that they are only interested in making a buck, and very often, only in making a quick buck. Of course, that can work out to the advantage of both parties if it means that an ownership regime is determined to put the best team in place and get the club in the best possible position before making a sale, which might look something like what we have seen with John Henry at Liverpool, but in France, there are more examples of American firms coming in, selling a club's most valuable assets, and then getting out, often leaving the club itself in a worse predicament than the one they found it in. There were pockets of protests among the Bordeaux fans when the takeover was completed by their American owners, to very little avail. Meanwhile, others were willing to give them a chance. Many people felt as though Bordeaux seemed like a bargain at just $82 million, given the size of the club and the lucrative upcoming Téléfoot TV deal set to kick in at the beginning of the 2020-21 campaign. But it didn't really turn out like that for GACP. In the 2017-18 season, Bordeaux had lost €21 million, and in GACP's first season owning the club, they slipped to 13th in the Ligue 1 table under Paulo Sousa and lost a further €26 million. One of the difficulties for Bordeaux was the fact that, like a number of French clubs, they moved into a new stadium in the build-up to Euro 2016. Bordeaux's previous home ground, the Stade Chaban-Delmas, had been their home since 1938, a charming old ground which was itself built in anticipation of France hosting the 1938 World Cup. Bordeaux's new stadium, literally named the Nouveau Stade de Bordeaux, or the Matmut Atlantique for sponsorship reasons, is a fantastic, state-of-the-art football stadium. Striking from the outside and practically flawless on the inside, the 4-star UEFA-rated Stade Matmut Atlantique looks stunning when it hosted 5 games at Euro 2016, but Bordeaux don't actually own their own ground, the city of Bordeaux does. What's more, the Matmut Atlantique, unlike Bordeaux's old ground, does not lie in the heart of Bordeaux. It is located right on the northern edge of the city, making it harder to reach for a number of the city's residents. It is also massive, and given Bordeaux's recent downturn, off and on the pitch, this magnificent arena now lies half empty for most Bordeaux games. Or half full, I suppose, depending on your perspective on these things, but in the context of this video, half empty seems more appropriate. As Bordeaux continued to hemorrhage cash, the club's new owners sought to arrest some of those losses through player sales. GACP had inherited a youthful set of playing staff with no lack of talent, and Brazilian wide man Malcolm had already been sold for more than £37 million whilst takeover negotiations were ongoing. That is more than half the amount that GACP paid to buy Bordeaux, being made on a single player, just to provide a bit of extra context there. Since then, Bordeaux have embarked on a mission of seemingly selling every player at the club who is worth anything at all. Jules Koundé was the first casualty of this policy, having looked like one of the best defenders in Ligue 1 at the age of only 20 during the 2018-19 campaign. He departed in the summer of 2019 to Sevilla for €25 million. Koundé has been followed out of the exit door at Bordeaux by the likes of Aurélien Tchouameni, Paul Bernardoni, Yacine Adli, and most recently Samuel Kalou, who joined Watford in the January transfer window just gone. Meanwhile, former Sunderland forward Josh Maja has spent the last 2 seasons back on loan in England as Bordeaux look to get him off the wage bill and, hopefully, prompt a permanent and lucrative return for him to the English game. It must be said, not all of Bordeaux's player sales have been a disaster. Some have seen them receive thoroughly reasonable fees. The problem, in those instances, is the fact that the club has failed to adequately reinvest that income, or, more often, hasn't attempted to reinvest that cash at all. On the big sales, however, it is difficult not to feel as though Bordeaux have sold themselves short. Koundé, for example, though I only saw him a handful of times at Bordeaux, already looked to be about as close to a surefire thing as one could imagine from a 20-year-old centre-back. A year after he joined Sevilla for €25 million, he was said to be valued at €75 million, with some of the biggest clubs in European football said to be chasing his signature. Sevilla have so far held off on selling Koundé, much to Bordeaux's chagrin, given their dire need for cash. But even when the Andalusians do come to selling the Frenchman, the amount Bordeaux can receive for him is limited. Bordeaux have a 20% sell-on fee for Koundé, but that fee is capped at €45 million, meaning that the maximum amount that Bordeaux can receive for Koundé's sale is €9 million, even if he were to transfer for a world record fee. Compare and contrast that with the €26.2 million that Rennes received when Ousmane Dembele transferred from Borussia Dortmund to Barcelona, and you start to get an idea of why Rennes, who are historically a much smaller club than Bordeaux, are currently 4th in the Ligue 1 table, meanwhile Bordeaux are in last. It reeks of shoddy negotiating, short-sightedness, and a failure to properly value their own players. Similarly, Aurélien Tchouameni, who Bordeaux sold to Monaco for just €20 million in January 2020, which was the same month in which he turned just 20 years old, has since been capped 7 times by France, establishing himself as a mainstay in midfield in what is the most talented and competitive national team anywhere on the planet. Amid interest from Manchester United and Liverpool, Monaco recently put an €18 million valuation on Tchouameni's head, 4 times the fee that Bordeaux received for him just 2 years ago. Having Koundé and Tchouameni in their ranks now, or just, having an extra €100 million in the bank, wouldn't fix all of Bordeaux's problems. But they probably wouldn't be bottom of the league or stuck in a perpetual cycle of fire sales. It is indicative of a broader mismanagement. It was disagreements over the way in which Bordeaux was being run and the future direction of the club that ultimately led to a feud between the ownership partners, GACP, and King Street Capital Management in 2019, only a year after the firms jointly acquired the club. In the resulting fallout, King Street bought out GACP, giving them full control over the way in which the club was run. As it turned out, GACP, who were the face of Bordeaux's takeover in 2018, had only ever actually owned 14% of the club. But despite their minority ownership stake, the group's chief executive, Joseph de Groza, held veto power over all major decisions taken by the club. There was a third party involved in the takeover, however, namely Fortress Investment Group, or FIG, who are a massive asset management company and private equity firm based in New York. If you are getting confused by all of these different private equity firms, initialisms and acronyms, then I do apologise, but basically, GACP were the face of the takeover in 2018, despite only actually acquiring 14% of the club, though they still had a big say in decision-making due to having a full veto. King Street Capital Management were the real owners with an 86% stake, but the takeover had been financed using large amounts of capital provided by the Fortress Investment Group. One of the three co-founders of Fortress, or FIG, was Wes Edens, who now owns the Milwaukee Bucks of the NBA, in addition to being the majority owner of Premier League side Aston Villa. Fortress manages over $45 billion in assets and are themselves now a subsidiary of the Japanese multinational SoftBank Group, which is the 27th largest company in the world. But we won't go down that particular rabbit hole for now. When King Street decided to buy out GACP's 14% stake in Bordeaux, just a year after both parties had acquired the club, they didn't do it with their own money. Oh no, of course they didn't. They went to Fortress again and borrowed a $50 million loan. By 2021, Fortress already appeared to have acknowledged that that wasn't a very wise decision, and that Bordeaux weren't in great shape, since they reportedly offered to settle the loan for just $30 million. But I'll try not to skip ahead just yet. Whatever GACP's weight had been when it came to running Bordeaux prior to 2019, and however they utilised their veto power, it might not have been all bad, given that things only went from bad to worse after King Street acquired the club outright. In fairness, and this is a degree of fairness that the group doesn't really deserve, they were met with some pretty significant obstacles. But instead of taking the reasonable precautions required to overcome those obstacles, King Street instead ran into them face first, with all their might, like a Japanese kamikaze pilot during World War II, determined to cause maximum destruction. One of the reasons why so many people, and hedge funds, American or otherwise, began to show an interest in acquiring French football clubs in 2018 was because of the TV deal that was struck between the Ligue de Football Professionnel, better known as the LFP, which is the governing body which represents the top two divisions of French football, and the Spanish multimedia group, Mediapro, in that same year. The 4-year deal that Mediapro signed up to with Ligue 1 and Ligue 2 was worth €780 million a year, for the right to 80% of the two leagues' rights, which was a 60% increase on the previous deal between the LFP and Canal+, and it meant that French football would have the second most lucrative broadcasting deal in all of world football, trailing only the Premier League. Now, buying a Premier League team tends to be rather expensive, and the combination of a lower price tag and sky-high TV revenue made French teams very attractive to investors. That is most likely, in fact, I would say almost certainly, why GACP and King Street Capital bought Bordeaux in 2018, and why Fortress felt comfortable lending them such a large amount of capital. The 4-year deal between Mediapro and the LFP was for the period from 2020 through to 2024, meaning that Bordeaux's early losses were manageable given that their revenue was set for a sharp increase in 2020-21. As many of you will already know, Mediapro only ever made the first instalment of their payments to the LFP, so that is 1 quarter of a season's worth, before missing payments for 2 successive quarters, and then the broadcast deal was terminated. If you missed that news, it was devastating for French football. According to some sources, 19 of the 20 Ligue 1 teams went up for sale overnight, and there are no prizes for guessing which club was the exception. It was supposed to be PSG, just in case that was too cryptic. Mediapro, who are based in Barcelona but have offices across the globe, had got into football by broadcasting the brand new Canadian Premier League, creating a subscription service upon which they broadcast the league's games, starting from their inaugural season in 2019. Mediapro had much bigger ideas than that though. They wanted to create a sports broadcasting behemoth that spanned all of Europe, but they needed a landmark rights deal to really get them started. Their first port of call was Serie A, who they offered the same €780 million a year deal that they ended up agreeing to with the LFP. Following some initial excitement, a number of Serie A teams expressed doubts about the credibility of Mediapro's plans, and having failed to have their concerns suitably addressed by the company, they declined their offer and accepted a lower offer, but one that was deemed to be safer for the division. The LFP allegedly made no such efforts to scrutinise the likelihood of Mediapro's business plans being a success or the legitimacy of their funds, but instead saw the dollar signs and a chance for Ligue 1 to wriggle free of the status as the weakest of Europe's so-called Big Five leagues. Mediapro partnered with TF1 Group to create Téléfoot, a paid television channel which would broadcast Ligue 1 and Ligue 2 football games. The boss of Canal Plus estimated that Telefoot would have to gain 7 million subscribers within their first year in order to meet their financial obligations. Mediapro has never released its internal figures, but reports estimate that at their peak, which was rather brief, they may have had 600,000 paying members. The contract between Mediapro and the LFP was cancelled, and then came the process of re-auctioning French football's TV rights, which I'm not going to get into the weeds with, since it could be an entire video of its own were I to properly explain it, but let's just say it was very messy, packed full of legal challenges. Meanwhile, French football clubs were left very much in the lurch, and with an enormous financial black hole. To cut a long story short, Amazon now has 80% of Ligue 1 and Ligue 2 television rights in France, with Canal Plus still having 20%. The details of the LFP's renegotiated deal with Amazon have not officially been disclosed yet, but the Financial Times reported that they were worth just €333.2 million a year compared to the €780 million deal that the LFP had with Mediapro. That also left Canal Plus rather infuriated, to say the least, since they are paying essentially the same price as Amazon are reported to be paying for just 20% of the coverage, meaning that they are paying 4 times as much as Amazon on a per-game basis. It is also reported that Amazon paid just €9 million for the right to broadcast up to 8 Ligue 2 games each weekend, which is less than a third of what beIN pays for just 2 games of Ligue 2 action per weekend. After getting burnt with Mediapro and their ill-fated rapid expansion plan, it is reported that the LFP were happy to accept a cut price offer from Amazon, not for security reasons like Syria, though they should be in safe hands with Amazon, but because they wanted to build a long-term partnership with one of the biggest companies in the world. And if taking a short-term financial hit resulted in long-term gains and a fruitful relationship with a media giant, that was considered to be a price worth paying. The problem, however, is that for a number of Ligue 1 and Ligue 2 teams, that hit could well be a knockout blow. The collapse of the Mediapro deal alone would have been enough to devastate just about every club other than PSG. But of course, that wasn't the only seismic revenue hit that French teams had to contend with. The COVID-19 pandemic hit French football just as hard, if not even harder, than every other league in Europe. Unlike the other Big 5 European leagues, Ligue 1 was not only suspended, but the 2019-20 season was actually cancelled, with the final league table decided on a points per game basis. That saw Bordeaux finish 12th as the club's losses spiraled to €35 million. If that sounds bad, following 2 €20 million plus losses in successive seasons, that is because it is. And over the summer of 2020, despite raising a further €15 million in player sales, really scraping the barrel in terms of saleable assets by this stage, Bordeaux didn't spend a single penny on recruitment. Hatem Ben Arfa constituted the club's only summer arrival, joining on a free transfer following a failed stint at Real Valladolid. Meanwhile, 6 players were fast-tracked from Bordeaux's B team and into the first team to make up for the shortfall. As Bordeaux's first team continued to fall apart, King Street further enraged supporters by changing the club's badge over the off-season with 0 fan consultation. The new badge, which made Bordeaux the predominant word rather than Girondins, as had been the case on the previous Bordeaux badge, also removed the de entirely, meaning that it no longer actually made grammatical sense in French. This was seen as further evidence that the club's American owners just didn't get it, so to speak, that they had no interest in getting it, and that with them, Bordeaux were only heading in one direction. Just over a week before the season actually began, manager Paulo Sousa resigned, owing to disagreements with the board. He was replaced by Jean-Louis Gasset, a vastly experienced coach who spent 3 very successful years at Bordeaux as Laurent Blanc's assistant between 2007 to 2010, and he would need all of his experience in this job. Initially, Gasset was able to get a tune out of Bordeaux's youthful and hastily assembled squad, with 3 successive January wins dragging the club out of trouble. In the January window, another player was sold, Brazilian centre-back Pablo this time. Meanwhile, Jean-Michel Seri was the only arrival, other than 2 youth players, joining on loan from Fulham as Josh Maja headed in the opposite direction. Bordeaux won just 1 of their next 13 games, and just when it seemed as though the situation could not get any worse, the club entered administration. King Street had pulled funding, and now the club was in serious trouble. Entering administration is rarely a good sign for any football club, but it is a particularly perilous situation for a French football club. The DNCG, which stands for the National Directorate of Management Control in English, is the organisation that monitors the accounts of every football club in the top 5 divisions of French football. There is no real equivalent organisation in England, and the DNCG are renowned for not messing about. Able to implement fines, sanctions, enforced relegations, and even expulsion from the entire professional French Football League system, when teams find themselves on the wrong side of the DNCG, it rarely ends well for them. Under ordinary circumstances, having gone into administration, Bordeaux would have faced automatic relegation from Ligue. But in light of the collapse of the Mediapro deal, and particularly the loss of income caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the DNCG showed some leniency, allowing Bordeaux a brief window to find a new owner and an injection of cash. That provided some temporary relief for Bordeaux, but very few assurances. The club had lost 21, 26, 35, and now over 50 million euros in each of the last 4 seasons. The previous owner had sold all of their players who were worth anything, and the club doesn't even own its own half-empty stadium. Essentially, any new owner would be buying the Bordeaux trademark, which admittedly does come with plenty of prestige and tradition, along with a half-decent academy. On the bright side, they would at least be buying a Ligue 1 team, since 3 wins from the club's last 4 games, off the back of a disastrous run of form, was enough to keep Bordeaux in the division. In June 2021, following 2 months in administration, Bordeaux finally had themselves a saviour. Gerard Lopez, the Luxembourgish Spanish businessman, famed for his large car collection, who will be familiar to those of you who watched my Lille documentary after they won the Ligue 1 title, decided to take on Bordeaux as his next project. During his time at Lille, Lopez had overseen the club's rise from a 17th place finish in the 2017-18 season to unlikely Ligue 1 title challenges. And in the same season that Lopez actually sold the club, Lille did indeed beat PSG to the Ligue 1 title. Lopez's strategy at Lille had also involved selling off the club's most valuable players, albeit whilst reinvesting some of that money, which Lille did very wisely with Luis Campos working as their director of football. Lopez was also known to be dogged at Lille when it came to driving players who he didn't want at the club for any reason out. And we have seen that strategy implemented, if anything, in even more draconian fashion at Bordeaux this season. Following another summer of sales, which has become a fact of life for Bordeaux fans by this stage, a raft of players arrived on loan, on free transfers, or for modest fees. Vladimir Petkovic, the man who orchestrated France's demise at Euro 2020 as Switzerland boss, was appointed as their first team coach. Petkovic has a very credible CV, but he had also been the Switzerland boss for the past 7 years, and readjusting to life back in the club game, at a club that is still firmly in chaos, proved to be slightly too big of a task. Petkovic's task was not helped by the fact that Lopez kept trying to get every high earner at the club off their books, by hook or by crook, often preventing them from even training with the first team, then isolating them, and just generally attempting to beat them into submission, either so that they would just accept the first offer that came their way during the January transfer window, or so that they would agree to terminate their contracts. Laurent Koscielny, previously Bordeaux's captain and the most senior member of their squad, was one such example. Koscielny was banned from training with the first team, and when seemingly no team came in for him in January, his playing contract, said to be among the largest at the club, was basically torn up, with Lopez trying to sell it as Koscielny moving upstairs into a senior role at the club. According to a statement, translated into English, Bordeaux stated, FC Girondins de Bordeaux and Laurent Koscielny have reached an agreement so that the latter, in a function which remains to be defined in connection with his career, can contribute to the development of international partnerships. End quote. In a function which remains to be defined. I mean, If you're going to sack someone, at least have the good grace to decide upon the bogus job title that you're going to try and palm them off with in advance. A 4 out of 10 for effort, and it remains unclear how Koscielny feels about all of this, and whether he even wanted to retire. Vladimir Petkovic was sacked last month following a 5-0 defeat to Reims, and he was replaced by David Guillon, who is yet to win any of his first 4 games in charge of the club. For Bordeaux fans, who are still among the most numerous in Ligue 1, averaging over 22,000 this season, in spite of everything that has happened both on and off the pitch, it is a miserable time to support their club. In January, Bordeaux terminated a contract with the club's main shirt sponsors, Winamax, after the bookmakers posted a series of jokes about the club to their Twitter page. In one post, Winamax quote-tweeted a tweet which read, "Write a sad story in 3 words." To which Winamax had tweeted, Girondins de Bordeaux. When Bordeaux announced the termination of the deal and explained their reasoning, Winamax quote-tweeted that as well, responding, "We've been looking for a good defence for an hour, but like Bordeaux, we can't find it." Bordeaux have conceded 68 goals this season, an average of 2.42 goals per game, which is by far the worst defensive record in the entire division. The club now has 10 games to try and save their season and to preserve their Ligue 1 status, but few supporters are hopeful. The threat of relegation, as far as they are concerned, was obvious in January, and the club responded by forcing out some of their most senior players and by selling one of their few players who had shown a bit of spark this season for less than £3 million. If you had said, just a decade ago, when Bordeaux had only recently won the Ligue 1 title and beat both Bayern Munich and Juventus in the Champions League, that in just 10 years' time, the club would be bottom of the Ligue 1 table, meanwhile Strasbourg, who had just been kicked out of professional football in France at the time and banished to the wilderness, would be 5th in Ligue 1, looking like good value to earn a European spot, with more than twice as many points on the board as Bordeaux, you would have been laughed out of the room or told to seek immediate medical attention. And yet, that is exactly what has happened. And in some respects, that ought to provide a rare glimmer of hope for Bordeaux in a roundabout way. All Strasbourg had a decade ago was a sizable loyal support and the appetite to one day climb back up the divisions. They say that a week is a long time in football, and a decade is almost an eternity. And whilst these are dark days indeed for one of French football's most illustrious clubs, if they can live to fight another day, Strasbourg serve as a timely reminder of how quickly things can change. So that is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. I thoroughly hope that you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case. It is totally free of charge, and apparently it helps with some kind of algorithm. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram, or both I suppose, via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.